right, guys, it's Monday. What a beautiful day. Welcome to this video. Before we get into the Metagame Monday action, I want to do a little bit of a personal advertisement here. I've chosen to move my platform from Patreon onto Metafy. I did that just yesterday, and the reason is basically that this platform will offer more options, more opportunities when it comes to like how to navigate I can kind of combine some, coaching with articles, with guides, and it just made a lot of sense for me personally. So in order to make the transfer for you guys from Patreon and onto Metafy as easy as possible, I negotiated a nice little code for that to be, less of a hiccup. Eco25 will grant you a nice little discount on the way over there. So if you're in the Patreon already, you can cancel, move over here, continue your support. Nothing really changes. I am hoping to go even harder this year than the previous year. I will do the Eco Cups regularly. Being a member of the $10 tier will be mandatory. Version 2 is already in the planning stage. I have my 3 VIPs already locked in, and I'm expanding to 32 players. So yeah, if you're interested in the guides, especially leading up to the showcase weekend, this coming weekend, Vintage and Legacy showcase coming up, and you like what I'm doing over here, please consider supporting. Thanks so much. So with that being said, let's just jump into why we're all here. The Metagame Monday, the breakdown of the Legacy metagame, and as I just alluded to, it's especially important going into showcase weekend that we have a good idea about what's going on here. So right off the bat here, 11 copies of Dimir Reanimator in these top 8s, 11 out of 40. So I'm not the best mathematician here, so 10 out of 40 would be 25. So this is more than 25. And that number is huge. So why is that? So the plan A of Entomb, Reanimator, Traxa, or Archon is simply just so strong game one. Not a lot of decks these days are hedging towards the graveyard pre-board, so that means your game one percentage is kind of off the charts. And at that point, you only have to take care of business one out of 2 games, and you will end up with a match win more often than not. So Dimir Reanimator is an incredible deck. The plan Bs are still, centered around Bowmasters, Baragorth, Murktide Regent with the Brazen Borrowers doing a little bit of double duty. Sometimes they're bouncing hate permanents, so you can win the game. Sometimes they're actually just getting in there for damage against an opponent who, mulliganed or force a willed in order to not die to the combo. And then you can kind of get there with your scrappy mid-range stuff. So Dimir Reanimator, the deck to beat, not close. That's one of the big stories this week. The other big story is the Tamiyo decks, which is basically like Dimir, or in some cases Esper, where you go into a bit more muddy waters when it comes to, is it a tempo deck, is it a mid-range deck? But it is a daze deck, and it's some kind of a police deck. We play Force of Will, we play Thoughtseize, we play Bowmasters, and I believe this version in particular is what has kind of made sure that Delver is not on top. So a little bit of a hero's downfall when it comes to Delver, and I think these slightly bigger blue decks with Orcish Bowmasters and all the wide removal spells in some of the cases are to thank for that. So this deck doesn't kill anybody quickly, doesn't completely shut anybody down when it comes to card advantage, but it's slow and steady wins the race. Well positioned because you have a good mana base in the field of Blood Moon, you have Bowmasters in the field of, opposing Delvers, and then you have all the cheap tools available to you from Fatal Push, Hydroblast, Consigned Memory, and Force of Wills and Wastelands to kind of make sure you don't die to unfair decks. So very, very well-rounded deck, and it's really showing in the results. Up next is an enemy or a friend, depending on who you are. I've played a little bit of a Moonstompy lately. I think that card is amazing when Eldrazi is on the rise. Then all of a sudden, if Chalice 1 is good against the field and Blood Moon is good against the field, I will definitely sign up to play some Moonstompy. The deck is putting up solid numbers. I think it's been between like 2 and 5 copies maybe ever since I started doing this series. So that's definitely a deck you should expect to play against in any bigger Legacy tournament. So you can't really just play a mana base with no basics and hope for the best. You kind of have to respect the fact that we're getting mooned early and often, especially because that deck, the stock list is running 8 moons with 4 magas on top at the moment. So we need to respect that card. Up next is a huge column of 2-ofs that did well. Oops All Spells, slightly below average. So we can kind of group that as a graveyard deck over here. Fast Reanimator, same thing, but I think the 2 copies out of the 40 has been somewhat standard. It's kind of the same players, and then they're kind of switching between the Magecraft combo deck, post sideboard or main deck, and kind of doing a little bit of switcheroo there. Then, as I said, only 2 copies of Delver. We can put that over here in the kind of the days column. And only 2 copies of Eldrazi. Eldrazi had a nice week last week, but now we're kind of back to, you know, it being a role player and not really a dominant force. And that's kind of funny, because if you scroll social media and talk to, you know, your average, let's say, enfranchised legacy player, they'll tell you that Eldrazi Temple, and that being the Eldrazi deck, and oh yeah, this is just such bullshit, you know, Micah Sponge, Cavern of Souls, this and that, and it's obsoleting a lot of stuff. But the results don't really show it, so I wouldn't be so worried. We can put it over here, because that's kind of our Ancient Tomb pile. A couple of painters, no news there. We've seen that time and time again. I've said it early. I've said it a lot, you know. Legacy painter experts will do well. That deck offers a variety of angles you can cover, thanks to cards like Urza Saga, thanks to the Goblin Engineer. And if the opponent is not 100% sure what's going on, you can kind of get, you know, a little bit, have an nasty surprise here and there, and you get a little bit of edge for having played the deck for a while. We can put it over here as well. It being an Ancient Tomb deck, you know, Consign of Memory is good against it. Hydroblast is good. There's a lot of overlap, basically, in the counterplay when it comes to Moon, Eldrazi, and Painter. So now we have some more combo decks that I don't really consider like serious metagame contenders, so it's mainly to celebrate those who did well. A couple of show and tell decks. One was even a Mind Over Matter deck. It was just awesome to see. I kept searching for, you know, like Omniscience or something in the deck, but there was just a one-ring deck looking to draw your whole deck with Mind Over Matter. Pretty cool. And then an Omniscience deck. I think both were adopting Stock Up, which is quite strong in this, you know, big, let's call it like Ancient Tomb combo, basically. Then at that point, Stock Up is just great, because it can theoretically go get you both Show and Tell and whatever you want to Show and Tell in, so pretty cool there. A couple of Necrodominance decks. I just see this deck as like a worse Oops All Spells deck, because you can play through less hate, but in a world of people spending a million sideboard slots on graveyard hate, there's something to be said about only forces working against the Necrodominance deck, so I guess there's that. A couple of versions of Nadu. Nadu is not dominating at all. Sometimes it makes an appearance. Last week was the only week that I didn't address the deck, and immediately there was somebody in the comments saying I should talk about the the state of Nadu, so I'm going to do that now. I believe it was 1 breakfast deck and 1 banned version. Yeah, seems pretty reasonable. The strategy is viable. The strategy is just not, you know, super dominating. Then there's a personal favorite of mine, a deck that I will for sure work on going into the showcase. There, Friction Dreadnought, I believe 1 Jeskai version and 1 blue-white version, made top 8s out of these 5 challenges. I love that strategy. I especially like the strategy when you get value from your stifle slots, that being, you know, Consign is good against the metagame, maybe the Doorkeeper Thrall is good against the metagame. And yeah, I mean, if people play a lot of Lightning Bolts, Dreadnought is going to live. People play, you know, Plows, Endings, and Pushes, it's not going to live. So you need to keep an eye out for that one for sure if you're going to sign up with Friction Dreadnought. Fan favorite and a personal favorite of mine. Last column here are the one-offs. We have a Black-White Taxes deck. That deck has been, you know, doing great these last 2 months. I believe this 1 finish is the lowest. So it has kind of had an average of 2, I believe. Then the outlier being, you know, this 1 and single 3 finish, I think. Good old Celestial Adepts made an appearance, and then we had a nice Miracles deck doing well. Counterbalance, you know, we did have the Tameo in there, but, you know, it's kind of cool to see, you know, 3 Terminus or 2 Terminus and treat the Angels. So yeah, some guys living the dream. Let's do it like this. I believe these guys are over here are kind of living the dream. And then this is the actual winning metagame that we have to worry about. So I grouped them into Graveyard, ton of Graveyard, Tempo or Daze decks, Ancient Tomb decks, And then these kind of niche decks that you may or may not encounter, but they certainly have legs. Yeah, that's just to say that there's a clear theme going into the showcase weekend, and I am covering that over here. So stock up is not the actual card. Stock up is mainly just to say that these cards have risen in stock. So let me just quickly go through all of these options, because we have 10 options here for Graveyard Hate, and I might even have forgotten something. So Leyline of the Void is basically in your deck without cantrips, because if you have cantrips, you kind of want to take advantage of the fact that you can keep hands without Graveyard Hate and then, you know, ponder into, what do I know, a Surgical or Ferromacabre, right? The Leyline is mainly for these stompy decks, and it's the most backbreaking because there's no, you know, shenanigans out of oops, all spells you can do. There's no, you know, Thoughtseize your hate, then try and win. And yeah, Leyline is like the most high variance one, I would say. Lowest floor, highest ceiling. Nile Spellbomb is one of these cards you can actually main deck. It's usually played with Nethergoyf. I like that a lot. You can also play it in your blue-black sideboard if you intend to sideboard it in against, you know, non-graveyard decks. As in, you know, if you bring it in against Temur Delver, if it's part of your sideboard plane, it's kind of nice that it cantrips. Cage is basically the Leyline that you can pay mana for, so you can kind of draw into it later. It also stops some Green Sun Zenith shenanigans out of Nadu. Surgical, you might want if you want your opponent to actually make the play, and then you kind of punish them tempo-wise. So something like Delver would want this, also because it flips the Delver thanks to the card type. Ferromacabre is kind of the same thing, except it's a creature. So let's say your deck with Once Upon a Time, you can tutor for it. If you play Recruiter of the Guard, you can tutor for it. So it's kind of like the card type coming into play here. I like the Macabre. I've been switching it up between Macabres and Leyline out of my Mono Red Prison deck, and that's mainly to do with scouting. The opponent will scout or Google me, oh, last finish was, you know, Mono Red Prison with Leylines. Then if I have a Ferromacabre, I can punish, and vice versa. So there goes a little bit of that into the dynamic as well. Soulguide Lantern is kind of like Nile Spellbomb, except you don't play you don't have to play black, so that would be, you know, your Painters of the World or other non-black Saga decks. Endurance, pretty self-explanatory. Your green creature deck, if your green count is high and you have like Zeniths or other creature tutors, this is a good card. Also, you can play it in something like Rhinos, where it doubles as a threat. It's good against Delver. A lot of crossover against Delver. That's actually the biggest boon to Endurance. Ghost Vacuum is kind of a weird one. I think it's good if you plan to bring it in against, you know, non-dedicated graveyard decks. Then it can kind of annoy people from the get-go. So let's say Nethergoyf saw a ton of play. Then this card is very good at, like, basically doing Relic of Progenitus from turn 1. Just keep holding down your opponent's graveyard and then hopefully some game-ending play in the late game. So I like that if, let's say, the metagame switches to a lot of Nethergoyf mirrors. First, I guess you would play in Stompy deck with Chalice of the Void because of it being a 2-cost. So if you have a lot of creatures in your deck, you can consider it out of Mono Red Prison for sure. Because you might want Chalice of the Void on 1, and then, you know, pretty nice to have a 2-drop that does a lot throughout the game, while also holding down the graveyard. And then the last card is Doughty Voidwalker. If you play you know, black aggressive deck like some of these blue-black decks or a Delver variant, you can even have it as a plan B out of Reanimator because it's like a mirror trump, and you know, it just attacks. So it's solid in the plan B of getting there with Barragoyf, Bowmasters, Murktide Regent. So yeah, if you care about the body and you think your opponent will not have that many tools to remove it, Voidwalker is a good one. I will also say this, that 2 mana is sometimes too late. It's very bad to die with one of these in hand and just die to oops all spells, right? So the too long didn't read is basically, please don't lose to the graveyard. We can't let this go on. We need to find a way to play like incidental stuff that sets us up well against the graveyard, whether it's, you know, Painter with Soul Guide in the main deck, or blue-black Tempo with Nile Spellbomb in the main deck, or Endurance is here, or whatever the case may be. Don't die to the graveyard. That is the #1 objective going into going into the coming week, especially with the showcase. I don't want to sit here in a week from now and then see 5 slots in the top 8 taken up by reanimator. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. All right, guys, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Very, very cool to see this. Whenever I research these decks, it's always so exciting to see what actually got over the hump. And then when you line it up visually here, it's a great way for me to understand where the format is at and which buttons I kind of have to tune in different directions. So hopefully it's helpful for you guys as well. Thanks so much for watching as always, and I'll see you back soon on the channel.